15 seconds. You're live and streaming tonight. 10 seconds. 5 seconds to off the audio. 2, 1, no audio.
Okay. I'd like to call the meeting of the September 9th, 2019 Board of Selectmen meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded for later broadcast. Is anybody in the audience also recording the meeting? If so, please raise your hand so you can be recorded. Seeing none, can we stand and salute the flag?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so no one has signed up for public comment. Is there anybody who came in after we grabbed the sign-in who would like to speak? Seeing none. Our first item on the agenda is a joint meeting with the Board of Registrars and the Town Clerk. I would invite them to come up and join us at the table at this time.
You got room there?
Yep.
Good evening.
I will ask the Chair of the Board of Registrars to call her meeting to order.
I'd like to call this meeting to order, the Board of Registrars of Voters.
Welcome. Thank you for coming in and spending some time with us. There's a proposal to form a subcommittee to try and investigate ways to encourage more participation in local elections. So we're here to try and figure that out. So, Madam Chair, do you have anything? Does the committee have any recommendations, suggestions, thoughts?
I do have a few thoughts. We discussed this a bit before we came up here. I think primarily the purpose of the Board of Registrars of Voters is to preserve the integrity of the vote. We handle registrations, recounts, complaints. We ensure there are properly trained poll workers. But we have encouraged voter registration, in fact, through a program that you, I believe, initiated while you were on that board, Mr. Carpenter. We will be continuing those efforts at the local high school, and we will also be working on continuing training of poll workers with the high school students. So we consider those efforts important, and we will plan to be continuing them. I believe, and I'm going to defer to our town clerk here, about the specific rules of engagement for the Board of Registrars and what we can do in terms of encouraging voting participation. I think, yes, it is everyone's civic responsibility to do that, but it is not a legal requirement to vote. But I would also have you take a look at the recent Yankee Express, in which all of the voting percentages from the local area towns were published. Auburn is right in the middle of the pack at 9.17%. The voting rate went down as low as 1.81% in the town of Douglas. So we are in the middle of the pack in terms of those percentages, but I think we would all like to see greater civic participation.
Yeah, and I just took some percentages from the past 10 years, this year it was low at the 9%, which we were in the middle, but all towns close to us were all complaining that they were low percentages this year, so. But basically, we were right in like 17 to 19% is consistently what we've had for the local elections, with just a couple of years at the 9, and this year being 9. And, unless there's something on the ballot that the voters want to come out.
Well, we also talked about the fact that over the last few years, the town of Auburn structure has changed. There's a lot less elected positions. So when you look at a ballot that had one contested race, I mean, that could have something to do with it, but certainly at the same time, you have less opportunity as well.
I think it's a community that, however, that, we can make some efforts as a community to encourage voting, and whether those are through our civic organizations, our registered political parties, anything like that, any kind of promotion to get out and vote, and I think that is important. As a matter of fact, next week is Constitution Week, from September 17th through the 23rd, and there will be some highlights about that. It is a nationally recognized day, voted in by Congress, and I think to have our citizens be reminded of that is important. So I think the message has to be consistent too. So I would recommend perhaps looking at our existing methods of communicating with our community, whether it's through our town Facebook page, things like that. The media has changed, and it's a little more difficult, I think, to get the message out, but it can still be delivered.
Board members have any thoughts or comments?
I don't mind going. So first, I have a question for Ms. Grimo. The 11% last year, I know it was very low.
9%.
9%, I'm sorry. But you just said that wasn't a trend, that was just...
No, I mean, as far as the towns, our surrounding towns
Right.
were all low. For us, 9% was low.
Right.
The last time we were at 9% was in 2017. Basically, all the years between, back to 2009, were 16 to 19, so pretty consistent at those percentages. But we didn't have a whole lot on the ballot last year. We did have the non-binding question, but there wasn't anything that went out on it that drove people to come out. We can't send out literature on that. So, as far as getting the word out, it's always on the website, usually a year in advance, because I have the election calendar for the following year, starting when we start with the Citizens Academy. So when I did Citizens Academy this year, I already had the dates for the 2020 election. So we're talking a year in advance. We've got it on the census that goes out in January. I have town meeting on there, and I have the annual town election on there, so that people know what the dates are. Do they remember them in May? Probably
Yeah.
not. And then our election is the third Tuesday in May. This year, being the third Tuesday in May was late, it went into Memorial Day. I don't know if people started their vacations early this year, but it was really nice out. So, that played a part in it too. There were sports, parents go to games and forget to vote.
If I may.
Other than that, I'm hoping, we've all had this discussion. Auburn, as a town, doesn't really have that central focal town place, but maybe when we have the Drury Square, maybe there'll be a place to put a banner or something. If you had something, some towns have, the huge banner that goes across a road up, town election this week, or town election in 3 weeks, or...
Well, and along that line, I don't know if businesses would buy in, but more and more we see the electronic message boards. I mean, we might be able to partner with some of those folks to have them put, for a period of time, town election information on their boards.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, they're already offering their boards for emergency
Right. Yep.
notices, so I'm sure they'd be willing to do a civic. So I have a couple more questions about voter percentages, and then some thoughts, if I may. So of our, whatever the number may be, 16,000 or roughly 17,000 voters, what percentage of those are registered voters?
For 16,000 residents, we have about close to 12,000 voters.
12,000 voters. And of those 12,000 voters, we know that an average of 17% vote in local elections, with the exception of, this this past year. What about state elections? Do you know that percentage?
It all depends. I mean, I could have brought all those. I do have
Yeah.
all those percentages. It depends on who's on the ballot.
But am I correct that it increases from your town election to your state election, and the largest percentage would be your federal elections?
Typically, a presidential primary, like the one that's coming up in 2020 in March, is very low. They are anticipating that to be busier than it was in 2016, which was probably about 50%, 55%. So if March brings out 60, 70% out to vote, I'm going to have signs up, hopefully there about, we have the 2020 census going out, the US 2020 census. I'll have that information out there so people will see it. Also try to get some kind of signs up that the local election's coming in May, just so hopefully it, gets embedded. But it all depends on who's on the ballot. If somebody's up for re-election, presidential, versus re-election, new president coming in.
So I'll just offer my thoughts on this, and I spoke to Mr. Carpenter briefly about this. My concern about us forming a subcommittee, specifically any member of the Board of Selectmen serving on this committee, is one of us is up for election or re-election annually. The town clerk is up for election every 3 years. As just stated, the registrar's jobs are to maintain the integrity of elections. I am all for reaching out to civic organizations, as you said, registered political organizations, but I do have a concern of, and I know none of us would do it for this reason, but it's all about the appearance. And if we were to form this committee this year, would it give the appearance that we're looking for a larger voter turnout this May? Or if we waited this year and for the following May, would we give the appearance that we're favoring one candidate over another? So I have a concern with the Board of Selectmen serving on this committee. But I'm all for reaching out to civic organizations. I think it's a great idea. Reaching out to, and Chief Coleman is the one that communicated with, I believe is it 7, Ms. Jacobson? 7 electronic
I
boards?
believe we have 7 businesses
Yeah.
have committed.
We're not promoting anything but information, so I think that would be a good start. So I think that we need to have some more conversations before we form a subcommittee, and that's just my view, and there are only 3 of us here tonight, so thank you.
Anything else from the board? Still Liberty.
Thank you all for coming in tonight. I think that some of the ideas that were thrown out just in a few minutes that we've been talking show that we really should have some kind of subcommittee put together with yourselves and probably some of us. I understand Mrs. Goodrich's concerns about having members of the board on that subcommittee looking into these things, and the appearance that maybe we want a higher turnout here or there. And of course, like you said, none of us on the board would try to do that, but the appearance is important. I think that some of that could be curbed with even a policy from the board itself saying members who are up for re-election in the next year or so wouldn't serve on the committee, something along those lines to limit any kind of fears that would exist. But I do think this is an important idea. Municipally, elections have low turnout, and that's a problem across the Commonwealth and the country. And elections in general are seeing pretty low turnout. So I think anything at any stage of government that anyone can do to try to increase turnout is important. So I would say that this is still an important idea to move forward with. And of course, my next question would be, is there any interest in serving from your side on a committee?
As far as a subcommittee, registrars cannot be a part of any committee. They can't be on a committee, otherwise they'd have to resign as a registrar. And I can't be in part of the register, because it's a board of 4. So maybe, putting it out to the public to see if you would get people that are interested in serving on the committee. I mean, I have to agree, with what Mrs. Goodrich had to say about, the appearance itself, who's ever up for election, it could be problematic. So, You know, another idea is this, you know, I do have student involvement, that I had the civics class in there. Not all of them are registered voters because they're not old enough to be voters yet. But out of the ones that are voters, maybe students, to get them involved in some kind of a committee would be a good idea, because they can come up with some ideas and they can get the word out, or that might be an idea also.
Yes. My reason for starting this, I think I've probably been on more ballots than anybody sitting here, so, and I am up for election next year. And in that it's my idea, I'm not necessarily willing to say I don't want to serve. So I guess I don't understand where the concerns come from, but that's okay. We all have our opinions. And asking you guys in wasn't to point a finger at anybody, and I mentioned this to the town clerk. If that was anybody's thought process, that I was saying somebody wasn't doing something, that's far from my point. My point is, we have a problem. 2009, yes, we had more people on the ballot, but we still have some fairly important positions that are on the ballot. And to me, library trustees, that's a pretty important job that we still elect. The town clerk is a pretty important job that we still elect. And the Board of Selectmen is a pretty important job that we really should be electing. I have my ideas about other boards that I'd like to see returned to elected, because I think this isn't the best system of government that we could come up with as far as citizen participation is involved. But I think we'll leave it at that for tonight. But I thank you guys for coming in, and wish you guys a good spring.
Thank you for having us. And would it be appropriate for me to ask to adjourn this committee?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night. You too. All right, give them a few minutes. Next up is Eastland Partners, a continued discussion on a project before us. Sure, absolutely. So, I get the big chair. Butters present currently, so I will open up to board members for any comments or any questions that they may have at this time. Mrs. Goodrich.
Thank you. I have a couple questions on the packet that we received.
Great.
So under this packet here, on page 11, I'm going to reference that. And then under the Ashworth Hills homes, I don't have, these aren't numbered, but it's about halfway in with the blue on the top. So I don't know if it's a typo or what the issue is, but on this one here, the rents for the one-bedroom, two-bedroom, and three-bedroom seem to go up naturally, you know, because they are. Yet on this one on page 11, the three-bedroom is $4,000 a month less than the three-bedroom, than the one-bedroom. See in the column, sales price rent?
I think I may be looking at the wrong page. I apologize. I've got page 11 here. Am I looking at?
Is the same one, Morgan, right?
I mean, I assume this is the document you're turning into DHCD, and there are conflicting numbers on it, so I just wondered why in one packet it's listed for a three-bedroom at 13 and one at 21.
I think if I may be mistaken here, but if the rental rate, if it is saying somewhere that on an affordable, that the rental rate is 21, is that what you're saying? Then it's
So I'm just looking at the affordable rates.
okay.
So on page 11, if you have that, on the affordable rate for a 3-bedroom, it's listed as $13.16.
Right.
For a 2-bedroom, it's listed as $14.18.
It's backwards.
Okay, so, and that's why I pointed that out. This is a document that I believe that you're turning into DHCD, that we'll be taking a position on.
Right.
So that's an error on this one?
It is an error there. I
Okay.
apologize, and as we were even looking earlier tonight, we noticed one other that in the application or the draft here, it talks about the building being 70 feet tall, when in fact that it's like, would be 45 would be the maximum. So I figured that one would be coming up and scaring everybody too, so I apologize for that.
And I'm not sure if it's fortunate for you or fortunate for the audience, but I went through this entire packet this weekend, had pages and pages of notes, and then just drove off without my copy. So, but I do remember a couple of the significant issues. One being, again, looking at the median income, and it's back to that same page, for the maximum income of affordable units, August 7th, 2019. You have a median income as $97,700. So that number really jumped out at me because we've been doing this for a long time.
Right.
And it seemed very high. I pulled our economic development strategic plan and have, from 2017, and have Auburn listed as 72,695. So I'm just wondering if you can explain to me how we got to a medium income, which seems very high for Auburn. I mean, we want it climbing, but we also want it accurate, of 97.7.
Help me with
Sure.
this one.
So that rating, the $97,000 rating, that was for the greater Worcester metro area. As you'll see when we submit our pro forma later, there are two different ways that you can look at medians and how you would determine affordable rents. One of those would be for the zip code in Auburn, and the other one would be for the greater metropolitan area.
So, to follow up on that, if I may, so when we go to look at the rates for affordable housing, are you telling me, although it's not the rate for Auburn, you're just looking at Central Mass, that's the rate we're going to use?
Right. There are a couple, they're called MSAs, which is a municipal statistical area, and that's how they're determined.
I have a problem with that,
I think
too.
what Clay's saying is it in the way DHCD and the Commonwealth looks at it is they bring it down to the metropolitan statistical area, and they set these rates. And I agree with you that the Worcester region, by and large, by the numbers, if I understand, comes across with a higher number than Auburn itself. But that's the number that DHCD uses in evaluating.
Okay, and not now, but sometime this week, if you could get the link or whatever to that
We will.
information to
Absolutely.
Julie. I'd like to look at that. That's all I have right now. I had much more, but those were the two that jumped out at me.
Get another bite at the apple in a couple of weeks, so. Anything else from board members, Mr. Luby?
Going off of what Mrs. Goodrich said, so you said that DHCD uses the Worcester, or well, not Worcester specifically, but the metro area as
Right.
their guidelines. Would you happen to know what the area code median income would be
For the area code
for
in
01501 Auburn?
In Auburn, I believe it's somewhere around that $70,000 range. Yeah, and that was pointed out in the PowerPoint presentation as well.
That's all I had. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Anything else, Mrs. Jacobson?
Through the chair, I'll just point to, as Mrs. Goodrich pointed out, in the economic development plan that we had done in 2017, I think the median income was 72. I think the most recent one is probably around 73, but the one that we have been using was the 2017 figure at 72 for the town.
If I may ask one more question?
Of course.
So, another sticking point, and I want to break it down more, not tonight, but in the future. I've said publicly before, I truly believe this is going to have a significant impact on the community and the cost to the community. And in your submittal to DHCD on page 3, I'm just going to make a statement, not have an argument, but it says that the $65 million residential project will generate nearly $1,400,000 in annual revenue. I'm still just not seeing that, and I hate using that figure until we see the impact on the schools. Thank you.
Yes, probably the best answer is that is, okay, I understand. I do. Our municipal impact work that we've done is, we've worked harder than anyone will ever know to go down the middle of the road and be unbiased, use data and all from experts, and that's what it comes up with. And I agree with you. We don't know exactly. It could be a few more, it could be a few less, but I think it's safe to say that it's not going to be double, or at least that's what we would get from using professional data.
I mean, I just in the packet, it just seems outrageous to say the town will be you'll be generating, $1,400,000 in revenue for the town. So if that happens, I look forward to seeing that, but I'm very skeptical on that.
If I may, and I appreciate it, as I say, the real estate tax revenue is really fairly simple calculations, because when it's ultimately done and the Board of Assessors are going to look at this property and they're going to look at it from the income approach, and they will value it from the income approach, and they will set whatever capitalization rate they use on income properties in town to derive and to come to what the real estate tax will be. I mean, those will be real and hard numbers that will be easy to look at. Again, then the next thing is excise taxes and things of those nature. People own cars, and people own these different things, and I think it's fair for us to say in this, automotive-based society that we live that, they're going to have cars, and interesting for me is I have a property on the Cape and I have a property up here, and it seems like both of those towns are fighting every year trying to get excise tax from me, and where do I live kind of thing. So they're real numbers and those add up. Your point is well taken, though, is as far as on the school children, we use the best information we have, and we believe that those are real.
So my last comment will be, just to be clear, yes, we may potentially have yearly revenue of $1,400,000, but we also may have, for the lack of a better financial term, expenses related to this that far exceed that $1,400,000. So I just don't want, when you look at this number, I don't want residents to immediately think like, oh, by allowing this project to go in, we're going to make $1,400,000 annually off of this project. Because then people take it that next step further and want to know where it is in the budget. So this is generating revenue, but the expenses may far exceed that.
I agree 100%.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I was going to ask if we could just clarify that. I think what Mrs. Goodrich was saying is the revenues you've shown, how you're going to generate the revenues. I think what if possible, to show it in the application that that's not net revenues.
Right. Okay.
You're talking gross revenues. You haven't yet indicated any expenses, and I think that's a concern just from the public perception that that's not a net number. So if there's any way to clarify that in the application, we understand that the real estate taxes and the excise taxes are going to generate revenues. You looked at what the building permits are, that there are going to be revenues. It's the expense side that right now is estimated, and really we don't know what the impacts are on the schools until those families actually move in and we see how many children are actually in the grades and what grades they're actually in. So I think if there's any way to just word it so that it will generate revenues, yet we recognize that there will be municipal expenses that
will offset
to
that.
offset the impact. The expenses will be the impacts of the project. If there's something we could work on that.
Okay.
I think that's what you're
That's
trying to do.
perfect, thank you.
Okay.
Is there anything else from the board? Mr. Lilliberty?
My question is a little bit off topic, but in the NSTRAT report, I was wondering if there is going to be any testing of the groundwater or the soil. They said that they didn't do any laboratory testings on that, and I know you had mentioned in the past that you might be using the groundwater in the development, so I was wondering what was going on there.
Well, the as far as the NSTRAT work that's been done, the Phase 1 work has all been done, and there hasn't been anything found that would be of issue. They do make recommendations that if these different things happen, maybe those things should be looked at. If we do use on-site water ultimately, which we hope is not the plan, but the scrutiny for that is tenfold what it would be for like work that they would do for, you know, like NSTRAT would use to see if there's any contamination, because at that point we'd be talking about a public water supply. And when it comes to public water supply and potable water and all, it, you know, it reaches the highest level as far as the scrutiny.
And about the soil, you said that it was Phase 1. Are there going to be more tests of the soil for?
Normally what they do is in that type of report, they go in, they do the history of the site, they see what has been there. It obviously varies tremendously. You know, I'd give an example that a development we're working on in the city of Framingham right now. It was a welding facility for 50 years, and it just expanded and expanded through the years. That type, when they go and they look at things, mostly when they talk about soils testing, they're talking about dig stuff up, let's see, you know, if anything was poured in the ground or anything of that nature along the way. From all the history that's available, even things today with like aerial photography and things that, you know, believe it or not, goes back 60, 70, 80 years now, they can look back and see, has that site been forested, you know, all these years or whatever, and they kind of know that, you know, nothing's gone on there.
All right, thank you.
Anything else? Mrs. Goodrich?
Thank you. I came across another question that I had on the page that talks about the Auburn DHCD rents and the utility allowances. So I'm a little familiar with RCAP Solutions, and I'm wondering how these are automatically built in, and isn't funding for RCAP based on whether they are funded?
That was something that was done through one of our housing consultants, David Cashman. In terms of the RCAP thing, I'm not so familiar. I do know that the way they calculate those rents is to look at housing as affordable. You would be spending no more than 33% of your monthly income as rent. So you would take that number and then subtract out that utility allowance, and that's how you would find that thing based on, you know, the different types of HVAC systems and heating and cooling and cooking and things like that. I can look into the RCAP, though.
Because, I mean, I know that RCAP, you know, has rental assistance for things like this, but it's strictly based on their budget and also who applies for it. So you know, my concern is, looking at that page still, is that an affordable unit, a one-bedroom affordable unit is $1,316 you know, after you deduct those utility allowances, which someone may be interested in renting an apartment, and we don't want to, have what happened back in the 80s with the housing crisis. Oh, yes, you can afford this apartment, it's only 1/3 of your income, and you're going to get this for your utilities through our cap solutions. And then I don't want somebody housed in an already overpriced apartment, in my opinion, for affordable, to be believing that they're going to get this utility assistance through our cap solutions, knowing that it's only based on what the Commonwealth budgets for annually. And when they run out of that money, the rental assistance is gone till the next fiscal year.
Well, my understanding and in my experience is these numbers are set net of utilities. And for example, if you move in and it says that the rent's $13.16, but there's $154 available because of your income that can be spent on utilities, if you find that the building's not built right or something like that and it's costing you $300, you can come back and it will be adjusted, it has to be adjusted to that. This is not contingent upon whether you can get this RCAP subsidy, if you will. That would be outside of it, and hopefully people, if it's available, I would say more often than not, people don't even know that it's available.
And that was going to be one of my questions, how anyone who is applying for affordable housing, how they're made aware of this RCAP solutions funding through the Commonwealth that assists with rental assistance and utility assistance. Because I'm sure you have noticed the past couple meetings, my concern is affordable housing for people in Auburn.
Right.
Thank you.
There's nothing else? I do have 2 items. Initially, when you proposed this project, it was at 250 units. You then went up to 320. I'm sure people are concerned, and I know it's been expressed by at least one resident, about traffic. So can you walk us through what your rationale was to bump it up to 320?
Okay. It's kind of the perfect storm, which is, and we believe is a good thing. And I'll talk about a couple different pieces of this. The stoplight at Albert Street on Route 20, if we all think about it and we look at that intersection, there's no reason for it to be there because there's no traffic at that intersection. The reason it is there is that back in 2007, 8, and 9, ultimately in 2009, a townhome development on land that is actually in Oxford was fully approved. And the road section, a portion of that approval was our land here in Auburn, the 64 acres, which was approved for 25 single-family homes. That roadway was designed to be constructed so that when that development was built of 320 units in Oxford, that traffic would all come through into Auburn and then down to this new interchange. Mass Highway literally built this traffic light on the anticipation that development was going to come to be. Well, fast forward 10 years, as we know, it didn't happen. The economy did what it did. We've bought the property, and we're looking at it differently. So as we sit here today, and as going back on all the time we've been evaluating everything we're looking to do, we have a situation where a traffic light, traffic studies, all of that information had already been done in the past, anticipating that there would be 320 townhomes plus 25 single-family homes that would, in the future, would be utilizing that stoplight. So from a traffic standpoint, that's what we looked at early on, saying, this makes all the sense in the world because it's already been planned for. Because if you've dealt with Mass Highway, it's not easy. And it's not easy for them to say, yes, we'll put a traffic light here or we'll put a traffic light there. You have to meet certain criteria for both now and or in the future for them to do that. So we were fortunate to have that information. Secondly, as we came in originally, with this whole 40B process, we originally looked at it and said, wow, this makes all the sense for 320 apartments at this location. We kept looking at it more, and we're doing the research, and we find that in the 40B and DHCD regulations, as they're written today, there's a provision called safe harbor. And arguably, the community, Auburn, if we did the traditional process and we went direct to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and we went through that process, within that, we don't know if they would, but they could say, because of the size of the town of Auburn today, we could limit this to 250 apartments. That's why it made that change. Then, as we've spent more time with things, we've looked at the site more, we've designed and looked at things, everything from going from 250 to 320. It virtually nobody from a neighborhood would even be able to tell the difference because of where these additional buildings would be. Couldn't even see them. You take that, you add that to the fact, as I mentioned earlier, as far as the traffic, the access and everything, that continues, to make sense. It's, can the site handle it? We have a 64-acre piece of land that we're looking to develop. I may be mistaken, but roughly 14, 15 acres of it, and the rest is going to be left at open space. So from that point of view, are we overwhelming the site? I think anyone would look at that and say no. We're able to do this, everything from, another question or concern people normally have is conservation. Is there wetlands involved and those types of things? We have all that information. Nowhere in this, whether it's 250 or 320, would be near a wetland where, other than in a couple really small places, we're in what's called the buffer zone. Other than that, that's it. There's no wetlands filling. There's no impacts as far as that goes. The next piece of it would be that we came upon, and look at the opportunity that, the community has this situation where our hope is that ultimately this connection with Worcester Water can happen. And in our proposal, we believe and are planning that we can actually financially make the connection to the city of Worcester for Auburn, for water. And that helps the entire town, everybody involved in town, no matter where you are. The next piece would be the issue of, in communities, with Chapter 40B, we have this requirement that the state has said you have to have a minimum of 10% of your housing inventory meet certain affordable requirements, and until you do, a 40B proposal can come in and be pushed through your community, more often than not in locations that don't make sense. In our case, again, going back to the traffic's already been vetted, the site, we're not using a lot of the site. any growth in what we originally appealed will not be visible from anybody anywhere. We said to ourselves, does this make sense? It continues clearly to make sense that by doing the 320 units at this location, from there forward, together with all the other work you've done with the school projects and all, it will put the town of Auburn essentially at 10%, where you will then be able to say, when that next proposal comes in, and it's in the middle of a residential neighborhood that's going to affect a lot of quiet residential streets, you as a community will have the ability to say, no, we don't want it there. And I've been involved in 40B for 20-plus years, and I'm a developer, and I can tell you there's been many times and cases where I've been in the room and I've listened to proposals that people have run forward, and I'm sitting there as a developer saying, that doesn't make sense. Let's not, we shouldn't do that in this location. All of the evaluation that we've been able to do, because at the end of the day, as a developer in spending our money and, trying to build housing, we also have to look at it and say, are we going down this road and are we going to spend, thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars to ultimately hit a wall for something that won't work or it shouldn't be there? Every one of those things we look at continuously, and I can tell you, in my 30 years, I've never had a better site. It works, and, hopefully that answers the question of why, we increased.
The 50 acres, I know there's a list going around as wants, needs, and desires of the town, and I know I mentioned earlier, you had mentioned the 50. Are you still committed to making a conservation restriction to that land so that it will not be able to be developed on?
Yes, absolutely.
Nothing else from the board members? Mrs. Goodrich?
Thank you. If I flip through long enough, I'd find my additional questions. So, again, and I get 40B, I know communities need it, and there's people raise the red flags and get nervous because they think low-income subsidized housing as opposed to affordable housing. So, I understand that these apartments, 1 to 3 bedrooms, the market rate will be $1,700 to $2,300 plus utilities. That's not an inexpensive rate for rentals, and the affordable will be $1,316 to $1,530 plus utilities.
Right.
So have you ever, in your 20 years of doing this, or 25, whatever you just said, you build out phase 1 and you've begun phase 2. Have you ever had difficulty renting the first building or the second building and made a decision not to move forward with the third building?
No, never.
Have you ever had an issue with renting?
I've known of developments. I've never, ever had an issue with renting. I mean, this, it's so easy, it rolls off the tongue. Housing crisis. It's real in the Commonwealth.
Oh, I agree.
As the governor has put out 135,000 housing units we need to get to basically to just equilibrium. And it's so easy for all of us to say, that doesn't affect me because I'm comfortably housed. The problem is, and it's quiet and it's happening behind the scenes, if you will, that we all make decisions every day, and we're all trying to do the best we can for ourselves. So I use as the example our best and our brightest. The young people, they're coming out of school. The reality is that with a college degree today, a better college degree, you're going to come out of school and you're probably going to earn $60,000 to $65,000. in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, it's real difficult to find a place to live. So what does that mean? Our best and our brightest, they're leaving. You're not seeing it every day. Talk to your friends, talk to, anybody you know as far as their children and this and that. They're moving away because they have to. So our solution is build more housing. A lot of the way the Commonwealth is structured with town level of government and everything handled at the local level, there's a tendency to say, well, okay, they can do it over in Millbury, or they can do it here, or they can do it there. I've heard it 1,000 times. I was playing around today with my calculator, and I asked Clay here, I said, well, the governor says we need 135,000 housing units. I asked him, I said, if every one of the 315 cities and towns in the Commonwealth allowed one project like we're proposing here, what would that do? Wouldn't solve the problem. Run the math. So we need the housing, and I'm sure some of you have, and I'm going to throw this out there, on the internet and with all that happens, with all the controversy that has been through the last 35, 40 years with 40B and affordable housing, there's a big study that was done where they went back, if I remember right, it's 4 or 5 projects, where this study group went back and looked at them after the fact. They looked at the files, and they looked at all the things where everybody came out of the woodwork and said, oh my God, it's going to be awful, it's going to be this, it's going to be that. And they asked a simple question, well, what happened? I suggest anybody's interested, read the study. The #1 development in that study is mine, and it was in Wellesley, Massachusetts. And they fought over that for 10 years. Made absolutely no sense. It became not about whether this is good for the community or not. It became, this guy wants to do it. We don't care whether we need it or not. But it was just kill the project. And it's with all of the other ones you see there. And they go through all the key things that came up. Well, traffic's going to be a problem. Look at the history. It's never been a problem. And I can tell you this, that as an owner of 40B apartments, I've not had problems with my 40B tenants. I've had some problems with my market rate tenants, but I really haven't. And the interesting thing that I think is really important to note that few of us pay attention to is, given its 25%, so 1 out of 4 is affordable, and everybody's together in the pot, and you can't tell one from the other. I'm telling you, from my experience, that's a good thing, because, be careful how I say it, those that have plenty and more than enough get to see those that don't, and those that don't get to see those that do. And I think everybody wins, because everybody's together. We need this in our society. And zoning is such in the Commonwealth that it is next to impossible, and we're left with 40B. So
We can do a last round, and then we have another meeting. So Mrs. Goodrich, I see
May
that
I?
you have a question, so please.
I do. I have two questions, and I'll try to be brief, and thank you,
Okay.
everyone, for waiting. So, first of all, I agree we need affordable housing, and the message we need to get out there is a better understanding of what 40B is and what it isn't, because it's not subsidized low-income housing. It doesn't fall under the Housing Authority. And I appreciate your comments about the Wellesley, and there was another one in your report that I believe, I don't recall the town it referenced, but it also, both of those communities were about 54 units. So I just find, we're just doing our due diligence here. There's certainly much less of an impact on a community at 54 units than 320, especially, again, to our school system. So, I appreciate that you went through a 10-year battle in Wellesley over 54 units, but we're looking at 320 units in Auburn, and I believe it will work out. We just need to do our due diligence here and ask you the questions we need to. If I may ask just one more question about the housing, because again, my focus has been on the affordable units. How do you address someone being overhoused and making that unit available if, say, somebody has a 3-bedroom home and the kids grow up and now they still met that criteria because they had a 5-member family, but now they're down to 2. How do you address someone being overhoused so that that unit is available for someone who needs it?
I haven't had a lot of experience with being overhoused. I've had a little experience with the affordable homes. Every year, everything gets looked at again, and your income gets reviewed and all. And I can tell you that my first experience was within the last year. Never had the situation. And came upon it where people no longer met the guidelines. And in that situation, it's interesting because what happens is they have 2 options. They can move out, or they can move into a market rate home. And that's the way it works. I can't tell you the exact timeline that it works as far as that, but it is, everything gets audited. The scrutiny is significant. And everything from, the business numbers, the annual audits that go on with that, but also all of the residents, all of their information, and, you'll be given whether you're in compliance or not in compliance. If you're not in compliance, that you've got a certain amount of time, to fix those things. Again, as I say, I've been fortunate with good management that I haven't dealt with that a lot.
Thank you. Thanks for answering all my questions.
Anything else?
Through the chair, and I want to thank all of you for your questions. We also have had some questions, and we appreciate that Eastland Partners has gotten back to us on the information. That's why we didn't want to recommend any type of vote yet. This is when you're first seeing this, and obviously there's some things that need to be adjusted
Right.
on this, which will be. And also, Mr. Chairman, you did mention a wish list. There is Mr. Huffman brought that up early on, that, we should be starting to think about what type of impacts this project will have on the town and what types of things we maybe want to work on in partnership with the developer if the board were to go through LIP. So as town administration, we've met internally, asked all the department heads to start looking at the impacts and, more importantly, what types of impacts would actually be a benefit to the residents of this particular complex, not just to the community as a whole, but also, what types of things could we look at that might make it a better project for the people who are going to live there. So we're starting to put that list together. We need to go back and make some tweaks. We had a preliminary meeting with Mr. Huffman just to see if we're on the right track as far as, is this what what the developer is looking for us to do? And then we can start to circulate our draft list. We've had to take a couple things off. What we're trying to avoid is putting something on a so-called wish list that's an operational expense, because there will be revenues, and the intent of paying taxes is to pay for the operation. So we're looking beyond the operations, recognizing that hopefully we cover any additional salaries of any additional positions, temporary or full-time, that need to come out as a result, and that's the kind of analysis we're doing. But then going beyond that and looking to see what other impacts are there that necessarily would not be covered by tax revenues, but which hopefully through a partnership, we may be able to address some of the needs of the community, and specifically of this particular community. So we are working on that. So with the board, I probably would recommend to take another look at this. If you can make a couple of adjustments. I see where Mrs. Goodrich are. I believe it's just a reversal, the 1, 2, 3, just a reversal of the affordable land on the market. That would be helpful.
Tough being human.
And I know it's a large application. And also, just so I'm clarify, also we wanted to get the MSA information that showed that the rates are established by DHCD based on a metropolitan statistical area analysis versus based on the individual town. That would be helpful, because I think it answers the question, are the rates in affordable housing in Auburn the same as affordable housing in, I don't think Westboro's in our area, but take another community that has significantly higher wealth factors. So I think that would help all of us understand how these rates get established, because I think everyone's intent is, if it's going to have affordable units, we want to make sure they're affordable to
Right.
people, hopefully Auburn residents who are looking for another housing option and want to be able to afford it, recognizing that 80% of it or 75% of it is going to be market. And that's market will be driven by the market. It's the affordable that I think we're all just concerned about. So get that. So that also just a little bit on the safe harbor, if you can just give me a little bit more on safe harbor on the 40B. And I think, does that cover what the board wanted to get back? Okay. So, and then we can talk, get me whatever information you have whenever, and we'll make sure we get it to the board.
Okay, that's great.
Send that over.
All right, before we move on, I did notice that you have had conversations with the RTA, and that is a big thing for me, that we need to start thinking about getting people around town, not just through town or to particular sites in town. We do want kids to be able to, if they have jobs, not necessarily have to have a car. They may not be able to afford a car. Elders who don't necessarily want or need to conform to our senior bus schedule, having availability wider is beneficial.
Could not agree more. I drive in the traffic every day, and if we can put 10 people on the bus, take 10 cars off the road, everybody would be happy. And it's possible. We just need to get out there, communicate, and I think ultimately it does us no good if nobody knows it's there. So we need to do both. We need to get it there, and then we need to let people know it is there.
Well, thank you guys for your time tonight, and thank you to the board members and staff for their input. Are we putting this on for another 2 weeks? Is that the plan?
If that's
So,
okay with the board, we'll do that.
is everybody going to be ready in 2 weeks?
Yes.
Perfect.
If I may, within the week, we'll be delivering updated with the corrections. I think I'm close enough with my numbers and all, and we'll talk about like wish list items and things of that nature. And then I'll have the package information as far as the numbers, as far as the development costs and things of that nature. As I'd mentioned to Julie, it's, in construction out there is kind of wild right now, where numbers are and all, and we just wanted to make sure we have everything worked down, because it all ties together. And then, we believe we'll have a complete package that you can all look at, and we can go through. And then, again, lastly is all of the questions, anything anybody can come up, we want to run through them. And I think the questions tonight have been great, and they've been on point for what we're trying to accomplish, and that is that ultimately we're asking this board to make a decision whether you support this moving forward. It's not an approval of it ultimately, because from there, that allows us to go to DHCD with our application. One of the things to note, even with numbers and things you'll be getting, it's an interesting clause kind of that's written in the application where it clearly says that, upon submission, DHCD will commission an appraisal, a professional appraisal that will run through everything. And they will not issue a site letter until they've run through it and found that all the numbers make sense. At that point, at this level, we're kind of out of it. Then we go to the ZBA, who in this case kind of are the stewards of the permit process. And, then we start getting into the nitty-gritty of, of all of those factors where, everything from traffic studies updated and everything will all be scrutinized as to, making sure they make sense. So, again, thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Have a good night.
Good night.
I ask board members to move up member Board of Selectmen General Item 6A.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We have a outdoor entertainment license for Century Sportsman Club. How are you this evening? Thank you for your patience. Just introduce yourself and...
Frank Height, I'm the treasurer of the Century Sportsman's Club.
I know you've done this many, many years, but can you, just for the viewing audience who may be new to town or may want to just check it out, can you tell us what you're going to do?
Sure. For approximately 20 years, we've been running a haunted hayride on our property. We have 42 acres on Rochdale Street. It runs every Friday and Saturday for the month of October. This year, we're trying out the last Sunday in the month as well. And it's open to all residents. It runs in the evening, so basically starts at dark. We run until the last wagon goes through, but it's generally 9:30 at night. It's a kid-friendly event, so basically people gotta, get their kids to bed, so it ends, relatively early. We'll have, hopefully, from 300 to 500 riders. It tends to get busier as we go through the month. And I don't know what else. Hopefully that describes it.
Okay. Board members have questions? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I make a motion to approve the license, provided that all applicable requirements of the state and town and any of its departments, boards, and commissions have been fulfilled. Said license is subject to all the conditions stated upon it. Failure to comply with any and all the conditions shall invalidate the license and render it null and void, with the conditions of the DCG to be placed on the license.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? There being none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? It is a vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck. All right, I'm going to ask that we move up Board of Selectmen General Items 6B.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? It is a vote. All right, so we have something for a request to name a town building at 21 Pheasant Court, which currently houses the Auburn Youth and Family Services.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Scott Wren. I'm the serving vice president, incoming president of Auburn Youth and Family Services. Back on the 23rd, the fellow board of directors and I had met looking to figure a way to show appreciation to Sally D'Arcangelo for her 30 years of service. We just felt a plaque or a little plaque or a mug wouldn't do it for everything she's done for this town, for the countless hours she has put in. So we did have a vote on the 23rd that we would like to nominate the building owned by the town at, again, that was a 21 Pheasant Court? Yes.
Yep.
To be named the Sally D'Arcangelo Center for Auburn Youth and Family Services Incorporated.
You're aware of the process? There'll be a public hearing?
That's correct, yes.
Is there any board member comment or questions? Seeing none. As I read this, what we need to do is establish a hearing date.
I would ask that that could be at the next hearing in 2 weeks.
Can we do it that quickly? 2 weeks?
Through the chair, I don't believe there's any type of legal requirement for this type of hearing. It's not a planning board
Okay,
related hearing, so it's just a standard posting of 48 hours.
okay. Is there a motion to make that happen?
Motion that we schedule a hearing to name, what number, 21 Pheasant Court, the Sally D'Angelo Center for Auburn Youth and Family Services Incorporated.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? It is a vote. There you go.
Thank you very much.
Couple of weeks. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
It looks like there are 3 items zoning-related that we have somebody here for, so I'm going to ask that we move up Board of Selectmen, general items 6D, 6E, and 6F.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? It is a vote. Mr. Menard is here, so why doesn't he come and join us? And Darlene, I don't know if you're here for this as well, but please join us at the table. All right. How's everybody tonight? Thank you for your patience. I know it's a long night, already a long day, so. So we have a proposed zoning bylaw amendment to the tiny home bylaw for the special town meeting, and this involves some sort of appendix Q, which relates to a building code that has not been adopted by someone. Is that correct?
Correct. It was discovered recently by Building Commissioner Kibble Moody that the state was not going to adopt the 2008 International Residence Code. They were going to instead move forward to the 2020 International Residence Code, which the state may adopt in a couple of years. So the tiny home bylaw that was approved at town meeting this past May mentioned the Appendix Q, which specifically addresses tiny homes in the building code. We spoke to town council, and he recommended that we put adopting Appendix Q of the building code. Just the town itself can adopt this code, and that way any tiny homes that may be built will have to adhere to the specifications that I mentioned in Appendix Q.
What is the benefit of adoption for anybody?
There are different requirements in the building code for the tiny homes in this appendix. A lot of the code talks about lofts and allows a loft in a tiny home that is different than a loft in a single-family house. And also ceiling heights are addressed. You can have a lower ceiling height in a tiny home than in a single-family residence, I believe. I want to say 6'8" in a tiny home. I may be mistaken, but that's coming to me, where in a single family it's about 8 feet. So there are just some specific requirements that in a tiny home that will have to be adhered to instead of the single family.
Board members have any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay. And this is proposed Article 19 on the warrant. The next one is
Do we have to
proposed...
take, excuse me, do we need to take a vote to transmit it for the hearing?
Yeah, but I just wanted to deal with all of them.
Oh, okay.
Article 20, if I'm not mistaken, is about the Regional Mall Overlay District.
Correct. This is kind of a proactive bylaw we're looking to propose to try to ensure that the mall remains a viable facility. We all know that there are malls in Massachusetts that have had their troubles. This is a way to hopefully ensure they remain fiscally viable. One of the uses specifically mentioned, I think it's highlighted in red in your packet, it will allow a medical center and offices. Reliant just opened a few months ago. This will specifically allow them to continue operating. They would be able to operate anyways, but this would just basically in the bylaw allow it to be in official use. Also, there's some setback requirements. This is, from what I understood, a way for the mall to lease space in a kind of financial secure way. So they have 0 setbacks, so you can kind of carve out, like the rear line can be its own kind of single entity. It's still part of the mall, but however they do it financially kind of just makes sense for them. In the table of uses, I believe you have in your packet, there are a couple of changes. Again, they're in red. All the ends I added, they're all blank in the table of uses. It just kind of makes sense to continue with the not allowed uses. And there are a couple changes from special permit to site plan approval only. It needs to be reviewed by the planning board one way or the other. It just makes it a little simpler for the mall to get the permitting. And it does allow one new use, a trade and professional school conducted as a gainful business. So that would be a new allowed use at the mall.
Okay. Is there any questions, comments, concerns from board members? Okay. So the last one is proposed Article 21, and this involves something to do with the industrial park on Sword Street.
Yes, they're proposing a map change. Currently in the industrial park district, if you look in your map, there are several parcels that are split between the industrial park district and the residential district. Whenever the map was drawn, however many years ago, they didn't follow the parcel lines. This will rectify the parcel lines, so those that are industrial park already, just the whole parcel will be an industrial park. Also, the board's proposing to extend the industrial park district all along the length of Sword Street to Southbridge Street and northwards on Southbridge Street on one side only, on the west side to the Worcester line. Most of this area is already an industrial area. It has the Polar facility. It has Atlas Distributing, several other kind of industrial uses. This will give the businesses more options for the most part, especially multiple tenants. There are multiple offices to reside in these buildings. So some of these properties are currently vacant. Hopefully changing the district will give them more options as they seek tenants.
The only question is, as we change these lines, are any of these backing up to existing residential homes?
In the current industrial park district, none of the residential homes will be affected. They're already bordering the industrial park, so there really shouldn't be any new impact to them. There is a residential zone up on the Worcester line. If you see a map up in this corner here, the residential area is part in Worcester, part in Auburn. It's already non-conforming as a general industry district. They just remain non-conforming. There'd be really no impact to their properties at all. They just remain non-conforming.
Boy Street is going to be rezoned from residential to, there's a lot of residential houses not too far from Sword Street. We have Franklin Field over there as well. So if we're going to expand their use, and then we have residents living there, it's going to have an impact on residents, because if I can now put my building further into a zone that I couldn't before, it's going to have an impact. So that's why I ask. I'm not necessarily in favor of turning residential districts into commercial districts or industrial districts, especially considering that they're some of the oldest neighborhoods in town. But that's not why we're here tonight. But thank you. Any other questions, comments, or concerns from board members? Seeing none. All right. We'll take 6D. Is there a motion to transmit this to the planning board for the required public hearing in accordance with MGL Chapter 40A, Section 5?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor? All those opposed? It is a vote. 6E, this is the Regional Mall Overlay District, also transmitting it according to the same MGL chapter. Is there a motion to transmit to our planning board?
Motion to transmit to the planning board.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? It is a vote. 6F deals with the industrial park, same MGL chapter. This is just transmitting it to the planning board for a public hearing. Is there a motion to do so?
Motion to transmit to the planning board.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? It is a vote. All right. Thank you very much. And why we have Mrs. Coyle here?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Board of Selectmen, General M, can we move up 6G, a discussion of the revised plastic bag reduction bylaw?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? It is a vote.
Mr. Chair, if I can just jump in quickly before we turn over to Mrs. Coyle and our town planner. The board had asked back at a previous meeting, maybe a couple of months ago, to have the proposed plastic bag reduction bylaw as drafted reviewed by a couple of committees, including the zoning bylaw review committee. Even though we recognize it's not a zoning bylaw, it is a committee of residents that we asked to look at it, as well as the solid waste committee, because the proposed bylaw would have the enforcement authority with the board so also to have the Board of Health look at it. So I'll turn over, but those three boards and committees did look at this, and you asked them to report back with any revisions or recommendations they had. So that's what's before you tonight. So I'll turn.
Thank you. Mrs. Coyle.
Thank you, Julie. Good evening. So the plastic bag reduction draft that is before you comes from a lot of thought and a lot of review that has gone through. I think it's been probably a year and a half, 2 years ago that we first had the discussion regarding it, and we did have a draft with a lot of great language in it. But one of the reoccurring thoughts that came through when the boards were looking at is where is the state at this point with plastic bag reduction, because there's been a lot that's happened in the past couple of years, and that's one of the things that kept coming up. So taking a look at the draft that we had, excuse me, and also looking at where the state was, I think that there's a lot of discussion at the state level regarding it, and they've had drafts that have gone through a lot of changes, but we took a look at where they were at and tried to take a look and see what made sense from their language. So the draft that is before you is very similar to what is at the state level, and with some changes that we thought would make sense here at the local level. And so that is the reason from the draft, the original draft, to this. One of the big things that we wanted to take a look at from Solid Waste Advisory and also the Board of Health was making sure we have a bylaw that people understand, it's easy to follow, and that can be something that businesses are able to make changes in a thoughtful way. So this draft has a listing of all of the definitions, which we feel are easy to follow, and then it also identifies in the regulation what a single-use bag is. It identifies the 4 mil thickness or less, which is an important piece to understand what we're talking about for thickness, and then identifying what establishments this would apply to with some common sense exceptions. So everybody obviously goes to the supermarket. When you go to the deli, you're going to get meats in single-use plastic bags. Same thing with fish, drippy things, anything that is going to be like a hazard, pesticides, solvents, anything that is going to be prone to leakage. So there's certain things that we deal with, plastic, every day, and those things we do have to exempt. Also, one of the other big items that is exempted is dry cleaning bags. Everybody goes to the dry cleaning and you get your clothes in a protective bag. So there are certain exceptions in the bylaw that we think make sense. And then also with that, at the local level for the Board of Health, we have tried to increase people's awareness of recognizing plastic bags, what it does to our solid waste and recycling. So getting the message out to the residents not to put plastic bags in the recycling. That's one of the number one contaminants. And giving people an outlet. So bring them back to the supermarket. They have a recycling area right in the front of the store. So you can bring them back, recycle them there, or repurpose them, reuse them, but they don't belong in recycling. So we try to lean a lot on education. So you will see that through our department. But that is in addition to this. But we think it makes sense to work with the messaging that is in this draft bylaw. The bylaw would take effect 6 months after having been approved at town meeting, and there are enforcement authorities through the Board of Health. We're hoping that a lot of education can be put out in conjunction with a lot of the business roundtables, the Chamber of Commerce. We're hoping to be able to work with those businesses if this is something that moves forward for town residents.
Board members, any questions? Goodrich?
Thank you. I know it refers in Section 3 to subject to fine and fees that the Board of Selectmen approves annually. Has there been discussion with your board as to what those fees would be? You don't have to tell me right now what they are, but have you had those discussions?
We have had discussions regarding what it would be, and I think that the board, I think, is open to, open to having that identified through the fine and fee schedule, obviously making a recommendation to Board of Selectmen. But we're hoping that there can be some warnings that don't have to hit people too hard, because we know that there's going to be an adjustment period to get people to understand what is required for the plastic bag bylaw, but also recognizing that we don't want the reoccurring fines to be so low that it doesn't bring people to the table to come into compliance.
And that's what I was going to ask, if they would, once someone's educated or given a verbal warning or whatever, if they would be progressive fines, because sometimes it's easier to just pay the fine than be in compliance.
Exactly.
That would be a progressive.
So
Okay.
we want to have a balance there. If we're going to be taking time to have to do enforcement, we don't want people to ignore it. It's an important undertaking. If we go down this route, obviously there's a lot of footwork that that the town would have to do. So we don't want to go backwards.
Thank you.
Liberty?
All right, I just had 2 questions. Actually, 3, that was one of them. Under the reusable carryout bag definition.
What section are you in?
Oh, that's section 1. It doesn't say how thick. Actually, it doesn't say for plastic at all, so it would only be machine washable cloth or hemp or other fibers. But it does say under single-use plastic carryout bags, under 4 mils in thickness. So I was wondering if a plastic bag was used that was over 4 mils in thickness, because there are businesses that have used those to try and said that they're reusable bags. If that would be considered in violation, or if that would be considered a reusable bag.
So I have seen that mill change in different, I guess, bylaws. And I think the intent is that you have to choose what thickness you're going to identify a single-use carry-out bag. I think there's a lot of discussion about it and I know some stores you go into, if you've got like a heavier plastic bag, I know I've gone into some, feel like, wow, this is a bag I could reuse. So I think identifying here in the definitions, if it is a plastic bag that's over 4 mils, then I don't think it qualifies for the single use. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense. And then my other question is, there are no exceptions in this that I've seen. When I started to do some research, there were some businesses that had said that there might be 6 months might be too quick, and they were wondering if there could be an exception or an extension granted to them. Was there any talk of not including an extension in this, or was 6 months just seemed like a reasonable amount of time? I was just wondering what the process was.
I think there was definitely discussion about it, and I think in the original draft, people could apply up to, I think maybe 2 extensions on that. Yeah, 2 or 3. So essentially, somebody could keep applying to the board, and then it would be basically a year and a half out before they would have to comply, versus maybe another business that was more diligent about, hey, there's a new bylaw in town, we want to make sure we follow it. So it didn't seem equitable to have that many extensions, and I know kind of internally that we had talked about it as well. If we had provisions in there for somebody using basically a time period to have to comply, that may become cumbersome for the board as well, because there's obviously a lot of businesses in town, so we could essentially see in the next year and a half, if we were going with the ability to allow somebody to do basically a stay on it, that may become administratively kind of heavy. But again, I mean, certainly that was kind of the gist of going with 6 months. But if the board felt that that was too short of a time and wanted to extend it out, we've seen a year for compliance. That's something, obviously the Board of Selectmen could look at and see if they wanted to make any changes to that.
I think the 6 months is enough time, personally. I think in the original draft, it was a little excessive to have, I think it was 18 months in total that was possible. I was just wondering what the reasoning, or if you had talked about it with them. But I think 6 months is an adequate amount of time, and certainly if it's going to save time on your end or on the administrative end of dealing with anyone receiving or sending in exception requests, then I think that's good.
Thank you. And I think just if the town is supportive of going in this route, we want to do all hands on deck, put out education, answer people's questions, help businesses come into compliance, and having, the ability to have to, go back to the table and, oh, okay, you have 6 months more, okay, so we're going to put that one on the back burner. We want to kind of like do the wave and kind of move forward.
And I know I made this offer to you in the past when we first started talking about this, but No, I'm in Amherst for a semester, but if there's anything I can do to lighten the workload on you and the Board of Health, then I'd be happy to. This is something that I've wanted to do for a while, so of course, if this goes well and passes, then feel free to reach out whenever there's work to be done.
Awesome. I welcome that. Thank you.
I have one question. You mentioned warnings. How would they be handled? Are you assuming that you're going to do that as an adoption of regulations?
So on the enforcement part of it, it references going through the civil violation through 21D, Chapter 40, which is the non-criminal disposition ticketing. What I think we were thinking, and even when we were kind of talking about how the enforcement part would go, I think having the fine fee schedule identifying what the, say, I'm going to just first, second, and third infractions. So if you were thinking like the first time you're going into a business, somebody says, geez, I went to this store and I got this bag and I think it's in violation, and then the board goes to investigate it. Essentially, I'm thinking we could go and either do a warning, a verbal warning, followed up with some sort of written form. Typically, we do inspections for food establishments, for example, a written inspection report. So identifying it in a report, giving a time for compliance, and then following up to make sure that they've come into compliance. So a warning with or without a monetary fine to it. In going back, if that same business is not coming into compliance and is not seeming to meet the requirements of the bylaw, issuing some sort of fine through non-criminal ticketing. Currently, right now, when somebody is not in compliance, we try all aspects to try to work with somebody, but ultimately, there are cases where we do have to write tickets.
So this would be part of the regulations that the Board of Health would adopt, or does 21D, Chapter 40, give you the authority to issue warnings?
I think by having it in this bylaw, I think it allows us to write the tickets through here. I think there was a provision here that the Board of Health could adopt regulations under number 4 to implement, enforce, and administer the chapter consistent with the provisions. I think we could adopt regulations, but I think the authority in 3B, I think, allows us to write the ticket.
I'm not worried about the ticket, I'm more worried about the warning process. How do I, as a business owner, know what to expect? Am I to expect when you walk in the door, you're going to give me a civil fine? People chatter, whatever, whether it's accurate or it's inaccurate. She didn't give me a fine, he didn't give me a fine, yada, yada, yada. Why am I getting a fine? So to me, if we're going to do a warning process, I think it should be in the actual bylaw rather than a regulation, so that someone can read it right off as simple as possible.
And I think we can put that into the fine and fee schedule. I think you can put in like first infraction, second infraction, third, if I'm not mistaken. I think that can be identified there. But, again, we can talk about the Board of Health doing a regulation, but it may be as simple if what I think you're asking is how is that process going to go? It might be as simple as identifying it in the Board of Health fee fine schedule.
My thing is, if we have a schedule and says first offense, it's $25 or whatever amount it is. I'm expecting you to give me a ticket. I think we need to let them know that there is a warning process. So I don't know how you get there. My understanding was this was not going to go to town meeting. This was supposed to come back to the board, and we were supposed to look at it. And I may be totally wrong on that, but that was my recollection. We weren't gung-ho to get it at the next town meeting. We were trying to, get it vetted and then go through it. So to me, I'm a little uncomfortable sending it to town meeting because I'm not necessarily comfortable with all the language that's in here. I think we need to make it as plain language as possible. I think this is, to people in the industry, I'm sure this is very common, but if I'm just opening up a shop today, I may not understand a lot of what's in this regulation. So that was the takeaway that I got from it. I mean, I know there was a lot of work put into it, and that's always appreciated, but I was not expecting this to go to town meeting. For the fall town meeting, I was thinking there was more review time back and forth, but again, I could be mistaken in my recollection, so.
And through the chair, it was our understanding that the board wanted to have it back early in September so that we could get it on a town meeting. So we did put a placeholder on the warrant, should the board still have the opportunity to make any tweaks to it between now and the time it goes out, which would be October 1st. So this would give the board, a couple of weeks to take a look at it. So the board wouldn't necessarily have to vote on the language this evening. We would need to have that final language by, I'd say it goes in the mail on the 1st, so it should be to us a couple days before that. But it was our understanding that the board wanted to get this on a fall town meeting, because if not, it had to wait until next May.
And as I said, it could be totally mistaken
Yeah, so,
on my part.
I mean, it's up
I
to the board,
wasn't ready
however you
for
want
it.
us to proceed with it, but those were the deadlines that we initially put in.
I mean, for myself, there's only 3 members here anyways. I'm not prepared to go forward with it even in 2 weeks. I think I would like to look at it for a little while, and I think we need to work on it and come up with some thoughts. But it's entirely up to the board what they want to do.
Well, I think 2 weeks is enough time to look this over, but I've been reading them through. I think when we had 60 towns, then I read all through of those, and we're up to 88 or something now, so there are a few more that I could look at, but that's enough time to look through and make any edits before it would go to town meeting or before it would have to be mailed out. I do agree that I think it would make it easier for businesses if they could see the warning and fine schedule, but at the same time, the way this is written now, at least my interpretation of it, and Mr. Coyle can correct me if I'm wrong, that the Board of Health could adopt their own regulations that are very specific, so there would be consistency between what businesses that have violations are going to be handed. So if the Board of Health were to do that, then that could be part of anything that was mailed out or any part of educational program on their end as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the bylaws, although the bylaws are more binding, for it to be consistent and get out there.
Through the chair, if I could also add, early on, years ago when we did the zoning bylaws, and this is to Mr. Liberty's point, a lot of the older bylaws in town had fees and fines in them, and they had phases of warnings and enforcement, and town council had advised that we take that out of future bylaws and put it into the schedule of fees and fines that the board would vote on an annual basis. So if state law changed, if laws came about that required that you had to fine a certain value, that rather than having to go back to town meeting and revise a bylaw, you could have the Board of Selectmen simply vote to update the fees and fines. So I think we have been following that process with all of the bylaws, not putting a fee and fine, but I recognize the policy itself has generally been separate, again, because town council had advised giving the boards and commissions the opportunity to change them as the need may arise, especially if the state does pass something.
For me, I just think warning language should be in there to authorize us to issue it. I don't care how you decide it. I just think that we're just talking about violations. We're not giving you the authority to say...
So you're saying to put a warning...
Correct.
That you...
I'm saying there's nothing in here that I see that gives you the authority to say, I'm not going to give you a fine today. So to the extent that we can clear that up, I think that's important. you're administrating a bylaw. That doesn't give you authority to then say, I'm going to deviate from what the bylaw says, which is, I come in, first time you walk in the door and I'm not in compliance, I got to get a fine. So to me, I think if we had language in there that said warning, that the Board of Health, whether it's the first time, the second time, I would rely upon the Board of Health and its agents as far as what you think is appropriate language. But I just feel that without that, I don't see, unless there's something in the rules that you've cited, gives you that authority. So that's why I'm trying to be more specific on that. And it certainly doesn't have to be answered tonight. But anyways, I know Mrs. Goodrich had her hand up, so.
Well, I think the town manager addressed part of mine, not having the fine and fee schedule. But, so a couple things. If the concern is that it's not clear in the bylaw that there is a written warning, you could simply put, all retail establishments shall be given a written warning for the first violation, and then be subject to the approved fine schedule, after that. But to make it easier, I assume we need to do some education to all businesses anyway. So I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, we will have adopted a fine and fee schedule and know just what we're doing when we adopt this bylaw. So wouldn't everyone be provided with not only the bylaw, but the fine and fee schedule? All retail establishments?
Yeah, so I think that was one of the things that we had talked about too, was if the board was looking to move forward on this, we knew that we would have to propose a change to the fine and fee schedule as well. Obviously, taking input from the board, I wasn't sure where you would want to have those fines and fees. The enforcement part that references here, obviously it's identifying Board of Health is going to be the authority that's going to be overseeing this. The 21D, Chapter 40 allows us to do the non-criminal ticketing, and then we have identified if we fail to get somebody into compliance, we can go further to identify that you can basically shut somebody down if they're not going to pay attention. So we kind of wanted to be general in that, but I do recognize what you're saying. If this does move forward, having a regulation or even a policy, a written policy, so that everybody knows what is expected. That might be something that is a little bit less. The regulation part, I think, is typically a longer process because the minute that you put, as Julie said, identifying the amounts in a regulation, then you have to go through and go through the whole public process again for changing any amounts. So I think that when we, a couple of years ago, came up with that fine and fee schedule that basically the Board of Selectmen votes every year, I think in October, we thought that might be easier to handle it there. But I don't disagree. Having it written down might make people feel a little bit more comfortable so that they know what to expect, and we can use that as an education piece when we go out to the businesses. This is the bylaw that you'd be required to follow, and here's what would happen should you stray from that. So that might be something like a written policy. If that would make you feel a little bit more direct.
I think there should be something empowering you to issue a warning. I'm not suggesting we go back to the old bylaw. I never suggested we put a fine in there. I'm simply saying, where do you derive the authority? Because I don't see it in the document. So to me, you're going to go in, or you're going to adopt a policy that is in contravention of the bylaw. There's nothing in here that says that you can issue a warning. So whether it's language that Mrs. Goodrich come up with, I'm not asking it tonight. I'm just saying I think you need to be empowered within the bylaw to do what you're suggesting. I don't think that's a policy issue. The policy is derived from this. You can't stray too far from that because people are going to start suing us, and we don't want that. But anyways, I think there's some sense that people want to move forward with it, so I'm certainly not going to stand in the way of this moving forward. I will take the 2 weeks, and I will make suggestions as they occur to my limited brain, and we'll see. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Have a good night. Thank you guys for everything. Thank you for staying extra late.
Thank you.
All right. So,
Mr. Chairman, I'd be curious to know which articles we need to, what items we need to move up so that Mr. Coyle can be heard.
I thought he was just sitting here because he was lonely. He didn't want to put on the AC at home. Okay. So I don't know if board members specifically have questions. This is simply to transmit it to town council, so we would probably be making recommendations next meeting. But if members have specific questions
Not till the
tonight,
next
rather than have you... Good. That's the right answer. All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good
Phil.
night,
Thank
Phil.
you.
Thank you.
You take care. All right, so, the only other thing, I know we have to go back to the communication item, but that seems to be a rather minor thing, so I'm just going to ask that we take Board of Selectmen General Item 6G, actually 6H, out of order.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed? It is a vote. All right, is there a motion to transmit the town meeting warrant to town council for review? We will be making recommendations, from what I understand, next meeting, but if people have questions, they should certainly feel free to let Julie know so that she can do her usual 5-second, it's there. Is there a motion to transmit this to Mr. Hennigan?
I'll make a motion to transmit the town meeting warrant to town council.
Is there a second?
Second for discussion.
Discussion.
Is that enough in the motion to approve the warrant? Is that motion clear enough? We're transmitting it, but we're supposed to be voting to approve it for final approval? I just want to be sure that the motion covers it.
Actually, I believe, I mean, the motion could cover to transmit it to town council. I think it would maybe to amend that to just say to approve the draft warrant, because it's a draft until he does go through it and approve it. So maybe just adding that word would help.
I'll amend my motion to include approve.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? It is a vote. All right, we have gift acceptances, and we actually have town manager item.
2 items back on the first page.
Oh, yes, we do have that.
Communications and 6C.
Let's try to ignore that one. Well, we can go back to communications. We have a letter from a young student from Webster who is involved with the Natchog River Young Marines out of Connecticut. And apparently, part of their proposal or their work is to promote Red Ribbon Week, which has something to do with living a drug-free life. The request is to have a proclamation issued by the Board of Selectmen in support of the same. Discussion? Mrs. Goodrich?
Thank you. So, I would just point out that we've had other requests to designate certain weeks for proclaiming an event or a cause from out of state, and we haven't supported those in the past.
Is there anything else? Hearing none. I agree with Mrs. Goodrich. I think it's a worthy effort. I would certainly support sending this to the school department for their review to see if this is something they can work into their programs, seems that it is seemingly geared towards youth and youth athletes as well. So, and I don't believe it meets our proclamation, really. It's not really attached to Auburn, but, all right.
I would agree.
So, I will take a motion to, one way or the other, issue, not issue, whatever it is.
I would make a motion to take no action and forward the request to the superintendent.
One second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? All those opposed? It is a vote. Okay. We have discussion on an applicant for the Finance Committee. Board members will remember that a long-serving and former chair, Kevin Hussey, chose not to seek reappointment after many years on the committee, and he serves in an at-large seat, and we do have a individual who, on their form, checked off Finance Committee. So the question is, do we want to bring this person back for an interview, or if the prior interview suffices? I will say my only concern on that is Ms. Kavanaugh is, for all intents and purposes, the chair, and part of our process usually involves the chair of the committee. I would not want to deprive her of an opportunity to interview the individual. That doesn't necessarily have to be at a board meeting, of course, but what are board members' thoughts?
I have a question on the open seat switch. So is it just one seat, or do we also have a precinct seat available? Just the one at-large?
Through the chair, if I may add, following the meeting where the Board of Selectmen interviewed the candidates for the ZBA associate position at the time, the board had suggested to the candidates and to me that I reach out to the candidates that were not selected to see if we could engage them somehow at their volunteer service in another area. So we did specifically call both candidates, and Mr. Marshall expressed an interest in the Finance Committee. So while he did check it off on here, he also, that was followed up with a phone call that we had with him a couple of weeks ago, that he was definitely interested.
It's a matter of how I don't think we've had this situation in the time I've been on the board, but...
So I'll make a motion that we put this on the agenda for the next meeting and forward this application to Mrs. Kavanaugh for her review of comments.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? It is a vote.
And through the chair, can I just clarify, so we'll be on the agenda for the next meeting for a vote for appointment and
Yes.
to invite Mrs. Kavanaugh to the meeting, or to invite...
If she chooses, or if she just wants to review.
Or the chair, because they're going to reorganize at their meeting next Wednesday.
Okay. And I guess
Invite the
we...
chair. So can we maybe make a motion to amend it to invite the chair if they're going to... We don't know who's going to be voted chair.
Okay.
Amended, are you willing to second the amendment? All those in favor?
And then lastly, do you want us to, at this point, contact Mr. Marshall or not?
I don't have additional questions. I don't know. It depends on whether the chairman of the Finance Committee would feel it necessary.
Okay. We'll reach out once we know
I
who
would
the
say the same.
voting
I
chair is.
would ask whoever the chair may be,
Great. We'll do that.
and we'll follow it up. All right. Having dispensed with page 1, we have gift acceptances. We have couple of, this AID initiative is really quite popular.
It is, and just, I had explained to Mr. Carpenter when we met on the agenda that some of these donations from businesses are going to fund AEDs to be placed on school grounds, and some will be placed on non-school grounds, so other town facilities. Dr. Brunel and I had a discussion, and initially we were dividing the vote to accept the donations between the school committee and the Board of Selectmen, depending on where the particular AED was placed. And we just thought it would be probably a better approach to have both the Board of Selectmen and the school committee vote on all of the donations that come in, and then we'll place them at the appropriate place. But this way, the thank you letters that go out to these companies that are donating will come from both the board and the school committee.
Nice. Thank you. Our first one is from TM Solution, Inc., $2,500 for the AED equipment. Is there a motion?
Motion to accept with gratitude and sign on to the joint thank you with the school department.
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed? It is a vote. Second, from Webster 5, $1,300 for the AED initiative. Is there a motion?
Motion to accept with gratitude and sign on to the joint thank you letter with the school department.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? It is a vote. We have to the animal control, Kathleen Sabina Animal Compound, a donation from Fur Friends of Auburn in the amount of $500, some cat and dog beds. Is there a motion?
Motion to accept with gratitude.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? It is a vote. Last but not least, we have a donation of a refrigerator from Home Depot to the Highway Department. It is approximate value of $800. Is there a motion?
Motion to accept with gratitude.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? It is a vote. We have no proclamations and recognitions. So our next item is discussion on the volunteer recognition event next week. So the subcommittee met earlier this evening with the head count that we got, which was 7 people. It was our recommendation to the full board to cancel the event. So it is up to the board what they would like to do.
We need all 3 votes to support this, but I believe that although we've only received 7 RSVPs, we'll have more people show up. And even if we don't, 7 of our volunteers RSVP'd to be thanked and recognized. So I think it would do a disservice to those 7 people to cancel the event. That's just my thought. Certainly, in lines of refreshments, I wouldn't get anything more than 20 people. You know, I wouldn't plan on 100, but I think if you planned on 20 people, that would be reasonable. But I just think that if we've put an invitation out there to recognize our volunteers, and 7 were kind enough to RSVP and want to be recognized for their service, I think that we should recognize them. But I'm 1 vote, so whatever,
But
you know.
we can't do anything without all 3.
Well, you are right. God, I feel powerful. Well, I'd like to hear, you know, I mean, I'd like to know if there's any discussion on my thoughts.
I mean, to me, I think, yes, 7 people applied, but I think to have town staff arrange a room to go through, taking them away from other duties that may, on the hope that we're going to get a flood, not a trickle, is optimistic. I appreciate the optimism, but I don't feel confident that we're going to get a lot of people. Additional to that, and I would not want to expend taxpayer money or staff time on something that I don't think is proven to be very successful, at least this year.
So I'd like to hear from Mrs. Jacobson, you know, her thoughts on on how much staff time would be expended on this if it were just to set up a small room?
Yeah, I was going to say, at this point, we could check the schedule for next Monday evening for the planning board room and see if that's available. It just doesn't, it's really not conducive to walking around and talking, so you'd probably want to just keep it here. It shouldn't be, I mean, I shouldn't speak for DPW, but I think DPW and Parks could set it up in probably a matter of 15 minutes, reset it up again.
And that would be during their regular workday?
Yeah, they would do that during the day when they're still here, and come back in the morning and reset it in the morning.
And then board members would be responsible for refreshments and setup and grading and et cetera?
Well, Heritage has offered to do that. They're catering, so. But I did warn them that we had a very minute, so, I mean, it's entirely up to the board. Personally, I know the chairman won't be in attendance. We do have a brief speaking program, so it's just, it doesn't seem to me to justify the expense or staff time. Whether it's 15 minutes, that's 15 minutes they could be doing something. We have no shortage of work for DPW staff to be doing if the lists that we get are any indication, and I'm sure they're far from complete, but, you know. You're going to vote however you're going to vote, Doreen.
I'm struggling with it. I mean, we've sent an invitation out. It's,
Now, why don't we do this? Take a 5-minute recess. Is there a motion for a 5-minute recess?
So moved.
Is there a second?
second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. We're out for 5 whole minutes. And you can do whatever you're going to do. Nobody's interested in this, Richard, trust me.
They're all YouTubing us.
Exactly. So there is, continues to be a conundrum. So I'm going to ask for a motion either way.
Through the chair, since I was asked if I can just not weigh in, because I don't want to have any part of the decision either way, but to just say, as far as staff time, this, for a small group, we really, Eddie and I could actually do, we could do the setup, Parks could do the setup. It's not a lot of time, as much as it would be if it was a very large group. That is a lot of time. I do think a lot of staff time has gone into it already that we can't get back, but again, we do that because the board wants to acknowledge and thank their volunteers, and so it's staff time that's part of our jobs, and that's fine. So please don't use our staff time as a reason to go forward or not go forward. We're happy to do whatever the board wants us to do for recognition.
And certainly I didn't mention it to blame anybody. I know.
No, I'm just saying, for as far as having, how much time it's going to take, it really wouldn't be too bad. It's not like having 100 people. That would take a lot of time.
Yeah, well, it's up to the board, what they want to do. So is there a motion either way?
I'll make a motion either way, to cancel the volunteer recognition event for September 16th.
Is there a second?
I'll second it for discussion.
Okay. Mrs. Goodrich.
I'm still uncomfortable uninviting people who we've requested to recognize. And I will be here.
Okay. So, sounds like the motion's not going to pass. Would somebody like to withdraw their motion?
I'll withdraw my motion.
Would somebody else like to make a motion?
I don't think we need one.
I think it would be good. The committee gave you a recommendation. You're choosing to ignore the subcommittee's recommendation. So as a subcommittee member, I would love that we're going to keep it because we really believe in this event.
Well, we've already got the volunteer recognition event scheduled for September 16th.
Appease me.
Appease you what, that, make a motion that we hold the scheduled event?
That we're going to disregard the recommendation of the subcommittee and go forward with this. That's what I would like.
I'm not making that motion.
Okay. Then we are at a stalemate. So we have town manager items, Eastland Partners. Do we really need to talk about this anymore?
No, it's only on, as it always is, twice. We're good.
We have a 2019 emergency performance grant in the amount of $4,600 for Code Red.
We do. This is, again, we're fortunate to be able to apply for these dollars. This is formula-driven, so this is the dollar amount that's established for us based on our population. So as we have every year, we'll be applying for it to fund our emergency management system. We have looked at other systems to see if there's anything out there that's better. We're actually having a talk next week when we meet with the local emergency management, but we're very happy with the Code Red service, so if I can, I would like to ask the board to just amend the vote to allow us to apply to fund our emergency notification system, just in case, as opposed to just specifying Code Red. I believe we will be staying with Code Red. It's been great. I think there's a concern about transitioning to a new system and getting people used to a different system, but just in case, I don't want to disrespect a potential discussion by the LEMPC. So I'd rather put, if the board would make a motion to authorize, accept, and expend in the amount of $4,600 to partially fund our web-based emergency notification system.
Sounds like a good motion. Anybody willing to make it?
I'll make a motion to authorize, authorize and accept and expend the amount of $4,600 to partially fund the emergency notification system for town management.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? There being none, all those in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
It is unanimous. We have another municipal grant.
We do. We have an opportunity to apply to the state under a program. I believe this grant is due in early October, so it's not quite due yet, but I know we've been working on it since June with CMRPC. So CMRPC had reached out to us to see if we would be interested in working with them to apply for funding to, under this grant program. I think I mentioned this maybe about a year ago, that internally, we started talking about developing an ADA transition plan, and it's a massive undertaking. It's a lot of staff time. We quite honestly don't have the time or the resources to do it all on our own. The state recognizes that, so they've got this grant program in place for communities like us to apply for, to get consulting assistance to help with this. So CMRPC worked and came back with an estimate from a couple of different consultants on the state bid list of about $65,000 to take this project on. It's a huge project. So we would like to go forward and apply for those funds and hopefully get those funds so we can start this ADA transition plan. My guess is it would probably take, it's anywhere from 12 to 18 months to put this thing together. It's large. Then once it's together, it's the whole implementation of the strategies that are identified in the plan. So this is a multi-year project, so this will be the first step in applying. I do want to let the board know that we did try to do some of this internally. We put together an internal committee. We had Bill Coyle, Joanna Paquin from DPW and Engineering, Caleb Moody, the Building Commissioner, Adam Menard, the planner, and Joe Fahey from the School Department, all of whom were trying to find the time to get all this done. And clearly, it's just such a large undertaking. Even for a consultant, that's a large project. So we would like to go forward with CMRPC and apply for the grant and see if the state would fund it, and then we can get on our way with this.
Question, the dog park. I know it's in design. Is that being designed to be ADH compliant?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any questions on the grant proposal in front of us?
The park itself the dog park itself would be ADA compliant, because it's a new facility and you have to follow that. Of course, the hard part is it's going into an existing park, not all of which is ADA compliant. So over time, with a plan like this, you would have to look at all your parks, look at all your facilities, and make any improvements to the ADA accessibility, but the park itself will be designed to be ADA compliant.
Yeah, I just don't want to spend the money twice to make it ADA compliant, I guess. Is there any questions, comments, concerns? Is there a motion?
Motion to authorize, accept, and expend grant funds up to $65,000 for ADA improvement.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? There's a vote. All right. The only other thing we have is minutes of June 24th, 2019, and July 15, 2019. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections? Hearing none, they'll be accepted as submitted. And with that, if there's nothing else from board members, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? It is a vote. We are adjourned. Good night.